I'm Charlotta, and in a second I'm going to talk to you all about Dior for Spring Summer 26. Before we do that, do please give this video a thumbs up so other people can find about it too. Thanks, and let's get started. Hello and welcome. We're right in the middle of Paris Fashion Week, and JW Anderson has just shown his first show with Dior. So I thought it would be interesting to look at it in a bit more detail, both from a pattern cutting perspective, but probably the same for you as for me, somebody who also just loves fashion. And what I always find quite interesting for fashion houses with such a big history like Dior is how they pick and mix the archive, sometimes successfully, sometimes not. So even if you love vintage fashion, it's really interesting because quite often they incorporate their own vintage archive as such. And this was a really interesting collection. I didn't read up, I quote one paragraph, but that's it. I tried not to read up because I want to form my own opinion rather than other people's. But it was quite a mixed bag. So we had sort of classic nods to the bar suit, playing around this silhouette, sometimes successfully, sometimes less so. We had quite a lot of lace and sort of using a motif of Dior and big bows, which I wasn't that much a fan of. We had bows and hints of John Galliano and 1950s as the hats. I thought the hats are very John Galliano. Quite clever dresses. I quite like some of the jersey, like this styles, where it's using knit fabric in quite an unusual way. And again, sort of the scarf looks quite Galliano at Dior again. While the draping in jersey sometimes was really good, sometimes it went a little bit off, and this is one of our examples I really didn't get at all. Some people might love it, I did not. I like the coats, there weren't many, but they're really cleverly done, and they really sort of, this one picks up classic Dior again through John Galliano and then to and now, so it's sort of reinterpreting what Galliano interpreted as well. I did quite like the bows, and there were lots and lots of bows. So Dior is well known for the Dior, and I think especially the Miss Dior is more bowy. So there were a lot of bows. This was quite a nice one. I did this in two colors right at the beginning and halfway through. So I think we're hoping this will become quite a success, and it is very pretty, which doesn't always happen with fashion, but this is both pretty and well, it's sort of interesting enough to make it a little bit new rather than just a bow. They also did bows crossed with a bar suit, which very clever. I'm not 100% sure I like it. They had some very questionable things as well, like all in like sort of knit ensembles like that. I wasn't a fan of. They did it in a menswear. I didn't like it, and I'm not a fan of it now either. But when I see far too many legging sets in real life, I don't need to see it at Dior. Some of it I found a bit boring, like this one, like where you can see it's beautiful lace, but how it's executed and put together, it's a pretty-ish dress, but I'm not sure quite like the plain body with the big skirt and then the sort of collar. Tell you the truth, I taught a lot of 19-year-olds, 18-year-old students, and that's the sort of thing where they've done two pieces and they have to put it together, and they put it at the top and the bottom, and then they don't really think about the middle. So I wasn't that much a fan of that. And then some stuff I thought the pattern cutting was interesting, but it felt a bit like Pinterest or social media, Instagram about 3 years ago, like this style. I think it's a classic Dior, so I see where it's coming from, but sometimes you probably spot it now as well. Styles which have been redone so often, and they become like an iconic, not iconic, but it becomes like really noticeable that it's all over Pinterest. And this skirt reminded me a little bit of that. I think I've seen it lots of time. I think Victor and Rolf have done it as well. So yes, a real mixed variety, some really nice styles, some not so much, and some really interesting from a pattern cutting perspective. So let's turn over to a table and have a look. And of course, I'd love to know what you all think of this as I draw myself through the collection. Let's start with some bows. And there were definitely enough to satisfy any bow fans. You can see this is a Dior look from the 1950s. You can see there is a history of lots of bows. There's also capes with bows, for example. Again, similar time period. There is this very famous dress with bows, which of course was worn by Mrs. Maisel as well, for you bow fans. And again, as many bows as you want. And then these are the sort of classic Dior styles I always liked. What I always found about Dior is I've drawn quite a squishy bow. Quite often the Dior bow is quite minimalistic. It's sort of quite flat. It doesn't come in and out. It's sort of made out of a ribbon. Maybe bagged out rather than more like a squishy single layer ribbon, or really 3D. So it's always quite a minimalistic ribbon, which I've always liked. By contrast, the newest ribbons are a real mixture. So what I like about dresses like that is that you have a basic corset, which is then sort of extended probably in an understructure like that, and the whole thing is probably boned. So it's really lightweight but really strong, and then on top of it they've draped these bows, and they've done it quite cleverly because the bows are part of it. So what we basically have is a draped dress. So a draped bodice, which is bullet body all done in draping rather than flat pattern cutting, but it sort of drapes around here, it becomes less drapey there, and then again it's of drapes there, pretty very thin silky fabric, maybe drapes like that, and then the rest is really quite flat. And actually, if you look at here, it's sort of molded a bit. It looks a little bit funny. But it's then just a flat dress, and we've just added this extra sort of volume. And then the volume basically tucks over and becomes what would be the bow knot. And again, down here, it sort of goes underneath and it tucks underneath to become the bow. And then the bow, in this case, is sort of more squishy. But there are instances I've seen there have been squishy bows as well. But I found that quite interesting, how they sort of quoting all the Dior bows but making them not exact copies, because you could have just done like lots of pretty dresses with just tiny bows, but instead he put the bows everywhere, but some were like obvious bows and some were much more interesting. I quite liked this very, very sharp, it's actually not a shawl collar, it's like a quite a flat collar, but I really liked how he sort of used the classic beautifully tailored jacket we get in Dior, and which I think each designer, each creative director at the house has sort of tried to make their own. And this is quite a nice style where you have I never know what to call this collar. I want to call it tuxedo, but it's not. It's like a shawl collar, but you normally cut it separately. I'm going to zoom in for a second so we can see where the darts come from. You can't even see. Doesn't fit that perfectly around the bust, but I think that's always also part to do with the models, you know. And then it has really nice fitted sleeves. They look a little bit like they're either a two-part sleeve or they have like a black ribbon running down. I think it might just be the light. I actually think that satiny bow there is superfluous. I don't think we need it. But then what they've done, of course, is the sort of Dior bar jacket like that, but they made it really 3D, and they added a waist seam as well. And he's done quite a lot of his sort of 3D but it's probably molded on imagine a horsehair canvas or something, so it becomes really stiff, so you can sort of fold it in and out, and it becomes in a way a 3D bow which folds in and out. So it's really nicely done, and I think it would have been enough just like that with a nice satin contrast collar. I don't think it needs a bow. But it's sort of a little bit, that's sort of quite a sophisticated look, and I think the bow, it's sort of what you stick on afterwards if you're not quite happy with your work and you're trying to hide something. I do get that it's supposed to look like this is the ribbon hanging round your neck, and then the bow is sort of hanging off it, but there's something which for me doesn't quite work, but that might just be personal. What do you think? I hope you're enjoying the video up to now. Did you know that you can learn to design and draft your own clothes with me on my online pattern cutting school? So if this analysis of Dior has now really whetted your appetite, do have a look at the links in the description to see how you can also design and draft the clothes you'll want to wear every day. As I said, there are quite a few bigger bows as well in Dior history, and I'm going to show you a few. There's this really beautiful classic Dior style where you can sort of see how the drape looks like a bow, and again a much more sculptural bow than the classic Dior bow, and I quite like how that was interpreted at times. So one look I really didn't like was this one. You can sort of see where it's coming from. You can see how this is related to that, but one looks beautiful and flattering and the other one is just slightly wrong, and I guess you can guess which one I think is slightly wrong, and I hope you agree. So I think with this dress, I think that main bodice drape, now I'm not going to try to correct, I wouldn't dare, but if you had like a classic dress and it's got the drape like that, and I think the Galliano did that quite a lot, and then you have that really pointed waist, and then it's sort of lower down, but it actually sits at the natural waist rather than this is sort of sitting. It basically looks like you're wearing a swimsuit with, you know, like a body like in the 90s or 80s with the poppers, and then you sort of pop it through and it's sort of holding everything together. Well, I think a classic gown, I can totally imagine it, but I'm not a fan of proportions there. But then of course that is only my personal opinion. I really like some of the other draping through, which probably was more day wear. But as I said in the intro, I really like this look. I think that's sort of, again, using a simple drape like this one. Can you see it's sort of reinterpreted for day wear, but sometimes that look is a bit done like sort of, you know, the cash crap, or it doesn't quite work. But in this case it really works, because what we basically have is a really simple jersey blouse. I think it's jersey. It looks like a really fine, it could be like a silk knit, it could be a shirt as well, like a shirting fabric, but I think for some reason it has like a woven feel for me, and it's of course completely straight and then tucked in, and it's got our button stand. And then what they've basically done is a separate shawl collar, so I think it's quite probably a narrow neckline like this. So got a nice loose sleeve. I imagine it could either be, it's quite silky, which is why I think it's some sort of knit. And then it's got the button. They're quite a simple style. If you're fuller busted, you might want to add like a bust stud there, so it's not too baggy. But it's like a classic sort of nice dressy shirt. But then what they've done, or Dior has done, is basically added a separate shawl collar, which works like a sort of a roll collar as well. So it's literally just like a separate stitched on straight scarf style, and because if it's in a really nice jersey, then it will be completely soft and drapey. And then what they've done, rather than knotting it to at the center. They've basically stopped stitching it a little bit higher up here, and then you can do a knot to a side like that, and it sort of falls down like that. So probably it might be on both sides. They stop stitching there, which means you can then move it up where you want to. But it's like a sophisticated version of the pussy bow blouse, but completely different. And I can also see, I think it's actually really big, because you can sort of see on here it sort of nearly goes out, so it might have even done it asymmetric. It might either be that it's a really fine jersey you can drape around how you want it, or it's actually asymmetric, so it only drapes over one shoulder. So the scarf piece might be sort of like this, the insert, and that feels quite Galliano to me. There were two other draped looks which I nearly liked. I wasn't 100% sure about them. It was this one and this one. And you can see it's basically a similar type shirt for both of them, but slightly different materials. But again, it's like a nice interpretation of a shirt, so I quite liked that. So what you basically have is on one side is just a classic shirt. Again, actually this looks like a silk, doesn't it? This just looks like a nice shirt with quite an overlong sleeve, so it tucks in. I'm going to zoom in for 1 second because I can't actually see what color that is. I think it might be the same color on both sides. Let's have a look at the other one. I think the only thing that's asymmetric is the front as such. Yeah, it's the same color on both of them. And that's actually a really good tip if you're sort of inspired by something and you can't quite see the details. Quite often, if you look at something else that's been repeated, you can then work it out. So I've basically gone, one side is completely normal, and then the other side, they've basically, they're probably maybe from a yoke here, which just controls it a little bit more, they've added lots of volume there. And then it probably gets tucked in here. It might be completely loose, but I wonder if it's sort of tucked in like a blouson, and they've sort of done it where you have like a little, it sort of overwhelms the button stand, so you probably have a hidden button stand in there because you got so much volume there. And then they sort of done a little keyhole gap again where you can then add your lovely bow if you want to. I actually don't think, again, I think the bow, I get it as a principle, I think it detracts from both of them. I think both these styles without the black bow would actually be much more interesting. And this one is quite interesting because this one looks like the undergarment this time is sort of more draped like this across, and that might be sort of the whole top might be draped a little bit like that. And of course on here you would have a fitted garment underneath as well. And then it looks like this time this is sort of laying on top. So a little bit different. It might just be how it's styled as well. And then this one you can actually see how the yoke is holding it at the top. But it's quite nice how different interpretations look a little bit differently. This one also had an interesting pair of pleated trousers. Again, I really like the idea of having lots of little pleats. So it would be like a pair of, or basically ends up being a pair of really pleated trousers, really wide. But instead of pleats, you just have little pin tucks and pockets. So you got like these pin tucks stitched down, which then become tiny pleats. So it's like, instead of having one big pleat, you actually sort of vary it, which is quite a clever idea. I'm not 100% sure. It's got this sort of trompe d'oeil 3D, so where the fabric basically extends out, and then you've got like a pleated pin tucked waistband which sort of twists over and under. So it's very cleverly done. So you got your waistband like that, and then your pin tucked fabric sort of goes over and under, and it's probably an illusion. It probably won't be fully working. it's like that basically. It sort of twists over and under and looks a little bit like it might be even twisted round twice from the way I've drawn it, but it looks like there's one more twist there. But you can sort of see how I've played with it sort of being knotted, a bow again, because it's sort of this, of course, then yeah, there's definitely I think a second twist, and it looks like it's coming from this side. So you got like a double twist, twisting over and under like this, and that's sort of nearly like a bow again. I would love to know how you get in and out, where there's a side entry, and also from practicality I would love to know how that's cleaned. How is it dry cleaned, or do you just never clean it at all? Throughout the show there are quite a few sort of, I always call it bar suit inspired, but let's just call it suit inspired, and you think of classic Dior, but of course it's been interpreted by all the designers. But there are quite a few ones I quite liked. Two in the same color, which is this one, and then a much longer one, and that's just always quite interesting to sort of see how proportions can completely change it. And it's just not just the length, but also where stuff is placed and in the way where the collar is placed as well. So I'm going to draw the short one first. So the short one, and if you had a suit jacket, whether it's when you drafted or whether that's a sewing pattern, you could also sort of think about updating it by changing the details a little bit. That collar just went horrendously wrong. Did you see it? Always makes me laugh, and the drawing just doesn't do what my hands and my brain think it should. So you can see that is quite a cute little jacket, and actually I've drawn the sleeves far too long, short. The sleeves are more like that, and that's what sort of makes it really short. Apologies. But what you can see is it's quite unusual to have a short jacket like that with a double sort of breasted look, and then it's got the pockets, so it gives it sort of, everything is sort of quite nicely proportioned. The pockets are there, you've got the darts there, and then the details on your actual collar, they're really up there, and then you got these really long, quite narrow sleeves. So it's a really nice, I'm actually not sure I like it with the skirt, but I think that's quite a cute jacket, and I probably could see this, maybe something a little bit longer. He did quite a few things where everything is shrunken, like very short skirts. But I think that's actually quite a nice interpretation of the bar suit or classic jacket. And you can sort of see where her busts are. That's probably on a very high waist. So it's sort of in between a high waist and an empire. But that's quite a nice look. And that just, of course, means that if you would adapt one with a normal waist, you would just sort of move your shaping point higher up and then already start going A-line on the natural waist. This one, by contrast, same fabric, but just a completely different cut. So you can see the waist is a little bit more on the classic waist. It's still a double-breasted. That's what I quite liked about it. Then the collar is a little bit lower. Again, she's wearing it open, of course, which makes it a little bit different to compare. I'm gonna close it again. But you can see what they basically done is they stretched it out more, which I found is quite interesting. So it's not the same jacket and chopped off, but everything is just stretched out a little bit more. Put it like that. And again, the two buttons, which are actually quite low. And in this case, the sleeves are the same length. So that actually gives you indication how long the sleeves need to be on here, isn't it? But you can see how just by having the collar detail higher or lower, and that sometimes you can literally just, depending on what sort of jacket it is, you can redraw it, or you can do cheat collar as well, where you use like a flat collar, and then you can definitely put it where you want it. And again, putting the pockets in slightly different positions. So I think these are actually it's a bit difficult to see because one is open and one is closed, but having it a little bit lower and higher, and maybe also going into the body a little bit, how that can sort of change the proportions completely. And of course finally having it sort of slightly above the natural waist and then having it on the natural waist, how again that changes the look of everything. And I will imagine the shorter one, I wonder it's got a tiny bit of padding here to make it stand off like that, like the original bar suit. I hope you enjoyed this analysis of Dior Spring Summer 26, and of course I'd love to hear what you think of it too in the comments. Do let me know. I look forward to reading your comments, and thank you so much for watching.